You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast. I'm with Crystal Skillman. I really enjoy the art that you create, and we're going to chat a bit about something that I haven't seen, but is going to be debuting multiple areas. A play of yours called Rocketry, and I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this fascinating story and about the play and where it might be showing up.
Yeah, I was the story goes of the conception of the play that I was in Alabama. My friend Hugh Long was directing a play of mine about cosplayers, which is part of kind of my geek theater era. It's a really beautiful play written for Quee Gwynn's theater company, Vampire Cowboys, and Quee and I remain pretty close. So he was doing Geek Out there. He said, I want you to come. I want you to talk to the students. And he said, I want you to think about a commission. I want you to think about a way that we can maybe work on a new play that you develop here. So you don't do a full production here with the students, but you have, and he knew that I worked that way. So a way that I work as a playwright is that, and when I try to teach my students, none of them, when they're young, they never believe, but they will come to learn what I've learned, which is that, the play is really incomplete without a production. So to put all that pressure, you're just trying to make the play on the paper as good for each stage to get to each stage. And so I had developed this method partly because I had worked so much in musicals, and it's very rare that you write a first draft of a musical. First of all, you don't have enough money even for the right demos, right? So you're like, there's so much work in terms of how you show and how you share.
What songs sound great in your head, but
absolutely.
Don't fit.
And so I thought, I really was like, wait, why do playwrights put this pressure on themselves?
Yeah.
Is it because it's just cheaper, because it's just on the page? And now we're in an era where people don't, to be quite honest, don't have the time to read and or read beyond. I mean, it's always been like in Hollywood, you only read the first 10 pages, but typically in theater, people would sit with the script and it's a tough time. And then development within theaters went away, and that's how they internally heard scripts. And so that still happens, but on a much smaller level. So I thought, well, I've got to do that for myself, and because I am more of like, they said this about Quee too. We're a bit more of like showmakers. Like we think about the play or production, and also with musicals, you typically think about it because there's so many moving parts, and beyond just being like, hey, I just wrote this line. And so with Rocketmen, I was out there in Alabama, and I went to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center because that is what you do. I was in Decatur, very close to Huntsville. And
right?
All rockets. And it's Rocket City. And so I picked up a book called The Rocket Team, written by one of the American members of von Braun's team later on. He did several things within NASA, and I just start reading the story of the von Braun's team. Magnus, his brother, sent out on a rickety bicycle to talk to Americans, doesn't speak English. They're holed up so that the Germans don't kill them. It's the end of the war because of the secrets they have, which is the V2 secrets. And he says, don't shoot. Hey, hey, hire us, take us to America. And so I'm just like, what? I was like, what's going on? Like, I was like, I've never heard this story.
There's a dramatic scene, like right at the beginning.
Yeah. And I grew up, I was born in the 70s. So, all those, and you'll notice a lot in my work that I play with different aspects of the hero's journey and kind of break it and analyze it. And I kind of smash myths or ideas of myths in America and what it means to be an American. And sometimes they're very fun and big, like Geek, which deals with bullying. And Rocketman does this too in its own way. So, but I hadn't written it yet, right? I didn't know, but I was like, oh, what is the story? So I bought the book and I kept reading and reading and reading. In the middle of that book, there are about 3 chapters that deal with one of the labor camps in World War II that was making those V2 rockets called Dora. Now, it was written from a very technical point of view.
Yeah.
So it was more like, hey, these people that we hired to work here during the war, But like the truth is those people were brought in for extermination, to work to death, to make these V2 rockets. And there were so many of them. And in particular with Dora, there were several labor camps, and all of them are bad, obviously. And they really end up becoming concentration camps, particularly near the end of the war. If you really think about it, sometimes people, and they were able in their minds, I think, to mentally compartmentalize, which is how they got through it, which is a dark thing to say. But Dora Dora had so many aspects to it that made it so egregious, because you're making the V2 rockets underground. You're not seeing the light of day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and then there are these, and so then I was like, wait, this is the same technology that is brought here, and eventually, and von Braun is very instrumental to pushing for NASA. And there are many factors in this. There are many players in this story. So how do I not know about it? Well, some people do know the word Operation Paperclip. That is more widely known. But even still, as I've traveled the country with this play, some people are like, I've heard of that, but I don't really know what it is. So because the Americans were brought here in secret, and that was really part of the PR angle, and strictly, and that's not von Braun and the Germans being like, hey man, keep it secret, my Nazi past. That was America. That was their decision, and that was their PR angle, and this was the way to go. So 50 Germans.
Look at these people we found.
Yeah, and that's what they want. And so to be an American, so that team has an assimilation story of Germans in the South during the Jim Crow era becoming Americans and changing the world with their science fiction ideas. When you go to Disneyland, when you go to Tomorrowland, all of those rides, that vibe and that feel was based on von Braun's ideas, based on the illustrations that he had in magazines to illustrate his ideas. And he and Disney were friends, and they made 3 series together. So
wow.
Yeah, they're amazing. They're really interesting to watch. They're really interesting. Man in the Moon, Man in Space is the first one, and Man on Mars, I think.
So this real, real science, futurism.
Yep.
It
was all about
these are the
futurism.
things.
Yep. And so to the point where, if you watch 2001, that look, I mean, that's coming from several illustrators and sci-fi writers, but also Wernher von Braun influenced those sci-fi writers. And in a way, he was enacting and making their concepts a reality. So the sci-fi community was very enamored with him. He also is very charming. My mom would say, "Oh, I remember him. He was that really attractive German with the silver hair." He had a way about him. He had charisma. And he was also incredibly brilliant, and that is true. So we have aspects here of all sorts of a P.T. Barnum-ish kind of story, but we also have real wit, real intellectual capacity, and a real dedication and love of science and education. And that really did affect Americans, and he gives back a lot to the community. Huntsville becomes Rocket City, and all of these things.
Wow.
But the story, that is the story, and the way Operation Paperclip was told was, we accepted these Germans. They had a hard time. What would you do if Hitler was like, I'm going to kill you if you don't make these rockets, right? But the truth is, when you start to dig into the story, all of these guys that came from that era and came over to work on the project, they all worked they all were kids making rockets in Berlin at it was in this rocket society. And all they cared about was the rocket technology. And the truth was, they wanted to form space stations in space much earlier than it happened. But they also, and now we're finally getting there, but much earlier, because remember, I'm talking about the 40s into the 50s here. And when they had this dream, it was like in the 30s, they want to go to Mars. Like, this is like really, and so, and Wernher von Braun even writes a book called Project Mars. So all this is really great. And when I get something, I'm like, there's something here, but what's the play, right? Like, because what makes it different than a documentary or a book? Yeah. And Michael Newfield wrote a lot of books about him. He was very instrumental to my research. And there are several great books, and there's Chasing the Moon, which is a great book and series that was on PBS and on Amazon, that told from their perspective, the Germans' perspective, which I thought was really interesting. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. So I was like, I call up Hugh. I say, I think there's something here. I get the commission, right? But like, I'm like, what is it really? And in my research, so the way the play was written and has almost this flavor of it because there are a lot of reveals and the play breaks open a lot theatrically. But I think I was inspired by how I was also processing the story. So the next level of the story that I was like, Heinz Hermann Koelle. So I start to find these photos of von Braun, and he's with a lot of people all the time. But this younger kid who's like 13 years younger, he's also a rocketeer. He comes over later. He's one of the very, very few people brought over that's not one of the they call them the Penmunders, like not from that era. So Penmund was on the Baltic Sea, and that's where they really pioneered a lot of the V2 rockets. And that's really kind of the beginning where they're like, oh, we need laborers. This is getting dark. But we don't talk about it. And so it's a very controversial site in some ways because it is literally in some ways the birthplace of NASA and rocketry, but it also has this darker side. But like I said, all the labor camps were bad, but they got progressively more worse, of course, as the year went on and as men were dying and and they need more, and they're making dark decisions about those things. So I was like, okay, well, we meet them. What if we meet them in this story that they are starting to assimilate in America? It's post Fort Bliss, which is a time they didn't like to remember because they weren't allowed to really work. It's 1955. Now they're in Huntsville. Now they have an office. Now they're starting to work together. And this younger person comes in, which is true in 1955, with all these ideas. He helped Wernher with Project Mars. And so they really, they had this like dreamer quality together. So I thought, this is cool because you've got this chemistry of the Germans, which do like there's, Helmut Hulser is the founder of the analog computer. Like they all have these like little exciting geek moment and things. But I was like, but he is younger and attractive in the younger generation and also a threat to them in some ways because it's like they've always worked together in a certain way. So I thought, oh, this is cool. What happens when he goes to that office? What does that mean? And I think I really knew I had something when I was like, I know that he leaves the project in 1964. And I said, why? So what is that? Like, and he's doing well. So what is the story? And as I was penning these pages, I was influenced by an interview that I had read about in Monique Leve's book, German Rocketeers in the Dixie South, I think is the title. And she did some amazing work. She's German, and she's written several books. This was actually her thesis, I think, at some point, or had to publish as she was graduating somewhere. But she had done all these interviews in Huntsville, and a lot of people wanted to talk. A lot of people didn't want to talk. So there's this nostalgia. So when we first started to talk about Operation Paperclip, before Annie Jacobs' book and before these other things came to light, we talked about it in a very specific way. Hitler tells you to make rocket. He's got a gun to your head. What would you do? I don't know what I would do, right? So now we're starting to get to aspects of the story that's like, well, if there's paperwork where you have to decide who's making these rockets and like what happens to them if they try to sabotage it, right? Oh, now we're hanging them from rockets to make a point, which is what Arthur Rudolph does, who's still a member of this team, still a member. There's several members that were pretty high up, right? In the Nazi, working with the Nazis. So you're like, okay, can you take that and put it in a box? What does that mean? But is that right? And so, Koelle has a shinier version of the story, being younger, and also he was a prisoner of war for a significant part of the war, and so he doesn't really, and he's a pacifist, and he one of the things he does immediately is that he believes that his country should make things right, and also and so one of the first things he does at a speech that gets the ear of a German engineer is, as he's recruiting engineers, is he says that my country is sorry. We are sorry for what we did to the Jewish people. Now, this is something that is never said by the original Penmunders. It's never said by von Braun's team. There is no apology. In fact, there is no acknowledgement. Now, we can start to then go to like, and that's what the play does, is like they really hold on to that PR thing. Like, we can't do that. That's not really. So in their minds, like they kind of, as I researched them each, and you can get interviews with them because they were all interviewed when they came to this country. You can hear how they talk. You can hear their stories. So I really kind of was living with these guys' voices, so to speak. And for Heinz Hermann Koelle, when he and Saul, this Jewish engineer, become friends, he now is friends with someone who says, hey, I want to do my job and I want to get us to space and I want all the science and education, all the things that you guys want. But I also want to tell the truth. And I actually don't think those two things are separate. I actually think they're one thing. And Koelle can't understand, but you work here. This is my boss and mentor.
Yeah.
And so they start to kind of uncover the story, and Saul wants to let the community of Huntsville know the truth. And this causes all sorts of rifts in the play as we kind of examine. And Heinz Hermann Koelle, or HHK, as he's called often fondly by VB, who that's how they write to each other. They use their initials on documents and things. I think it's the exact push-pull that we're going through right now. How do I live a life? How do I provide for my family? How do I do what I was put on this earth to do, which is make rockets? And the other thing is that for the Germans, if they are sent back, and Heinz Hermann Koelle certainly knows this, he can't make rockets. It's outlawed. It's because of the sanctions. You literally can't do.
And it'll be a lifetime or a projected amount of time before there's any capacity.
Right. And then
or allowed.
Exactly. And it spans time. The whole first act deals with the fact that they are shut down about making their satellite, which is an error. Eisenhower was a little late to the game. And if you really follow, even with Sputnik, it wasn't until several days later that he even said, like, hey, that might have been not great. Like he really didn't get. And so that's the thing where the showman stuff does help, because von Braun is like, we are here. We are not the enemy. Let us loose. We're ready to go.
It's time for the future.
We want to fight the Russians. Like, come on. Like, and so finally, so you're following the thrilling politics of his office, they have to work in secret at some points to like get their explorer done. Like, it's a really riveting story. And then at the same time, you're watching this moral conundrum with this younger rocketeer. In Act 2, we start to get towards, they've achieved their goal. Now we're going to go into space, but where? And this is very true that they would talk a lot about the moon as an example. And obviously Jules Verne, makes it popular. And we've got,
it's not that far. It's pretty close.
It's not that far. It's pretty close. Right. So but really it becomes because of they finally have JFK and they finally have someone to champion them. And JFK and VB also have a strong relationship as well. As you sense, there's a theme here. He actually met JFK at a committee meeting for to pick Man of the Year for Time magazine, and he was really impressed by him. He gave some interviews about that. So there's this interesting thing about him, is that he has this. You trust him, and he has this air of. He's Prussian, he's got this like air about him, this aristocratic thing, but he's down to earth, right? So he's that,
like that presence, and
he's kind of that perfect American quality of the time, which is like you get in there with the engineers, you're very blue collar, you care just as much about where the valve goes, but you also can like talk about this huge future and ideas that you have, and actually you can make the drawings that could make it happen. So and in fact, and I'll get to that in a second. But so in Act 2, we're following where do we go? And Heinz Hermann Koelle is frustrated because Mars is the original goal, and we're getting further away from that, because even though the moon will do things, it is not a stunt, but it is not practical. It really is a demonstration and a flex of power.
Okay.
And as we know from that era in the space, we are now getting back to where we were, but because of Vietnam, the space program that they pioneer in NASA finally taking flight, so to speak, really in the 70s gets shut down. So in a way, however you feel about von Braun and his team, most people are mixed. Some people who knew him and with Huntsville feel much more sentimental. They did not accomplish their goal. He dies without accomplishing his goal. We're nowhere close to Mars and those sorts of things. And in fact, near the end, people stop listening to him. When you get older, you learn what these things mean.
That's the guy who's still talking about Mars.
Yeah, that's the guy. Absolutely. And he could not get a meeting at some point. At points, he ended up going to Washington. So this whole story plays out, and we see the decision that Koelle makes. We also see what happens with Saul when he tries to tell the truth. And so it's all set in that small office of Huntsville. But how does the play work? So there's the story, right? But the play works by 6 women addressing the truth that there are some things in the U.S. space and rocketry on the walls that call people that worked at Dora factory workers. What does that mean? Interesting. And they acknowledge the fact that they're a part of the story in a way that is important to them to tell the story, and that as they tell the story, they choose who's going to play the roles. They are women that then step into the roles of men. They dress in those suits. They get into the Mad Men looking era, so to speak, and then we go into that office. We stay in that office, but at the end of the play, in the last 20 minutes, which I think is what people are so startled by, so it's a little challenging to talk about because it's still that medium where like you want people to be able to experience it. But the whole office breaks open in many ways, and Dora perhaps was underneath this whole office in ways that we didn't quite expect. And women were involved in the story because in the last 3 months of the war, or few months, women from Buchenwald and concentration camps were brought into Dora to make those rockets. And so we've lived in a world where these women have played these men. They speak about their wives and their daughters, and they speak about, but we never see them. We never see them. But they love them. And that's why they're doing this. And that's why they keep these secrets. And that's why it's hard. And that's why they deal with that trauma and they put it in a box. And that's why they do things a certain way. And that's why, and then, there's a confrontation between someone who has been, we believe, a member of that office, and it's revealed who they really are. And the play ends in this real confrontation between this woman and von Braun. And it is a really, really startling. I mean, like I've written it and I've sat in it, in the production in Indianapolis and in many workshops, and it just does what theater does. It's something. A huge question is now playing out before you live, and you as an audience member realize, wow, that's why I was here, and that's why
love that.
That's why I'm watching this. It took a long time to get that construction, and it was through the process, as I mentioned before, and some support with that. The play has had an EST Sloan grant for these productions for Indianapolis, and then a Venturous grant through NNPN has helped support some of it as well for the role. So I feel really grateful, and each team is really, really passionate to tell the story. And I think the extra thing that happens with women playing the men, you're very curious the whole time, but once they start to play men, it's so like androgynous, sexy, real. You kind of forget, like you feel like that's them, but you always are aware. It's called the Rocket Men, but it's played by women, and so you're examining everything in a different way, like that bro hug, that bro handshake, the world and the society of men that can make things in a certain way, or during that time certainly was thought about, which is really the founding of capitalism, in the sense of like those gentlemen bankers saying the women stay home, they cook the meals, and they iron my pants, but I need to be, and I can be with people of different faiths even, but I need to be with men. That's what we do. That's how this works. This is how JP Morgan worked. This is how, so it's a very specific, and then you feel for his guys because they are fighting generals who don't really get what they're doing and all sorts of things. And there's this it just lives in all these complexities, because as well, what von Braun and his team did, and those that supported that work, and the generals that were on their sides, and we have all branches of the military involved here. And Eisner does this too. Finally, he doesn't quite get. He's really obsessed with Korea, as we know, and a lot of other things. But he gets it finally too. Let's separate the military from space. And that is radical and huge, because what that does, up until then, it was all war. It was so if you were someone who wanted to explore space, you're making a balloon in Japan to drop bombs on somebody, right? Right. So these complexities have existed for a long time in every war, because if someone could invent, Yes, there are dark people that, the venture of guns and things like that. They're doing it for their own purposes. Maybe they think it's protection, or they can make money, or these things. But there are so many people that, like, to have that level of a mind that can problem solve like that. It's very rare that you're like, well, I just want to kill people. Like, I don't
Right.
like, so you have really, because you have to
Yeah.
have a level of intellectual thought and capacity that is beyond brute animalistic natures and desires. Power exists with both of them, but I think this play deals with that as well, especially at a time when the current era we're in, as you could tell, this is an anti-fascist play in many ways, because it's examining how desire, power can fester, and how vouchsafing information or history is problematic. The play itself, as it's performed over, I'm traveling with it in a way. So I'm listening to people in different areas of the country. I didn't hear this story. I wasn't taught this, and I wasn't done this didn't happen. This didn't happen. And you're seeing them change or reflect, and maybe they can go out and tell the story. Because one of the reasons this is so important is that when I started teaching, I realized this was a problem, because I was brought in as a guest artist to, I'm a New Yorker. I live in my New York bubble, right? But like, I was born on the West Coast, but I mostly grew up in New York. And um, I'm like, holy crap, the fact that we have such different ways of educational, of how we're teaching in each state. Now we're in trouble, because these textbooks don't match. None of these textbooks match. None of the history matches. People are not learning the same things, like, and that includes the Holocaust, that includes the Civil War, that includes Vietnam. And these are things that shaped our country. And it's extremely important to understand the ground on which you are standing on and live in.
Yeah.
And this is why we talk about, okay, well, we're trying it's not necessarily considered the best method, because it's something stronger is probably needed than saying, hey, I'm on the land of the Lenape people. But we're starting to talk about those things, and starting to talk about how to deal with this, and how to hold both things in our hand, and not erase history, but also acknowledge all the levels of history. John Leguizamo was a big, passionate person with his shows on PBS, and he has a show at the Public right now. So, I mean,
Brilliant.
it's brilliant. He's brilliant. And so there's so much that we're attempting to do with that. And women's rights and women's history are really tied in this as well. So the play in itself, through the action of doing the play, has that function as a theater piece. In general, people are drawn to my work because it's not preachy, and yet it embraces every audience member. And one of the hardest things of writing this play was to write this play for so many different kinds of audience members. Someone who knows all of the history, someone who knows none of the history, somebody who knows part of the history, someone who really loves space and doesn't want you to bust their bubble, somebody who because I'm actually trying not to alienate yet be true. And so I think when things are open and vibrant and they invite you, that's when I win. That's when we win, because then your mind is going to other places of your own life, or choices you could have made, or maybe choices you will make. And that's the power of this debate, and the power of that theater can put forth in society by asking these big questions. But I don't believe it succeeds by saying a play is only meant for people who agreed with the question before they entered the theater. There's no reason to have the play, So I love that I'm going into typically they are blue bubbles and red states, but this play is being done in red states. This play is and there's a whole other conversation with that. There is in terms of the response to women playing men at the beginning, as opposed to how they feel at the end. And I'm learning a lot of our state of mind as Americans, I would say.
Yeah. I would see that as, I don't know, just listen about it, like necessarily foisted upon at the beginning, like for the displacement and what happens to you. Visually, it was really cool. I've seen a photo of the female actors and in dress, in garb. Um, wow. So like, plays on history. There's so much you brought up about like made me thinking about like kind of big ideas and ethos of like different eras. It was kind of funny. You mentioned born in '70. I was born in the '70s, and like when you were covering this whole thing, for me, I've always been fascinated by how fucked up '70s were. Like you don't have any of the naive or otherwise hope. You don't have the heavy reaction, or thinking in terms of the '60s, at least in the United States, of you know reconstructing what it is to live in the '90s. And then the '70s, it's like polluted, smelly, foggy, tough to get gas.
Oh yeah, I mean it. I think what we attach to, and it depends, like on your little bubble, right? That your little how you grew up. I think for me, it was the lens of it was the birth of the rebel. It was the birth of the story of the rebel, in a different way. And of course, when I say that, I'm thinking of Alan Sherman's song "The Rebel," which is hilarious. But you know, and my dad was a race car driver, and so I grew up in and kind of a dropout from society, and my mom ran away with him from her first husband. So I kind of grew up in this little bubble where I think that was definitely affecting some of the pop culture I was seeing, and the things that
Yeah,
affected me. Because if you actually follow, because obviously he loved racing movies and motorcycle stuff. So obviously we have Easy Rider. Easy Rider is like the iconic, I think, film of the '70s in a lot of ways. And then we have
yeah,
Steve McQueen, although that's like obviously from the World War II era, but that motorcycle sequence and in The Great Escape, and we have as well the Bullet, and so there's in a way the machine, like the way cars, racing, motorcycles are always contrary to society, but I think that you find a lot of that in the storytelling of rebels and rebellion, and in fact, actually,
I
One
like
Battle
that.
After Another, which I just saw, which is amazing, brings up almost all the feels of what I'm saying. And in fact, there's so much to talk about in that film, but there's also an extraordinary car chase at the end, like no car chase I've ever seen, and it is cool. And yeah, because there's something about the pursuit, there's something about the fleeing, there's something about, so I feel
Yeah,
like car chases often like are a sense of the spirit of escape. And for some, obviously I think Steve McQueen's sequence in The Great Escape is probably the most beautiful, because it's he's not the smartest character, he's the American of them, but you see in his fleeing from the Nazis and kind of this trying to get to Sweden,
yeah,
in a way it really captures the American spirit of God. And I think of that. I think of their story often when in our time today, because the whole point of those prisoners of war in that story, and why they tried so hard to rebel, and every prisoner of war did, in most cases in those camps, but gum up the works. And that
yeah,
was the whole point, gum up the works. And that's kind of what we're doing now. Like that's kind of the plan.
yeah.
That we don't have direct power, but what we need, we are not, don't do what they tell you to do. Don't they tell you to stand over there, don't stand over there. Like just think of me, so like be together, keep people together as safe as you can. And I think that's, and gumming up the works does that, because I think the the only way that they only understand a certain way of thinking, and they really can't think outside of the box like we do.
Well, the play, like even like in real life, the play and creating disruption, creating confusion that's created on the citizen side, language you speak, uh, speaking Spanish as a deflection, like all the way that people are thinking about, like gumming up the works, or being in the way, or you know.
Like that, like
So
in Vietnam, right? That amazing image of putting the flower in the gun,
yeah, yeah.
Tiananmen Square.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, quickly, where do you get this like simultaneous, like flowing world premieres of the Rocketmen? Like, where is that exactly? Those three
Oh yeah,
premieres?
yeah. So we just did Indianapolis. It was a really extraordinary experience, and it was exciting to see the crowds grow. They were always great, but they grew and they grew and they grew. the Kurt Vonnegut Museum is out there, and all the
Yes.
Kurt
I,
Vonnegut. If you love Kurt Vonnegut, you will love this play.
yeah.
I'm
Oh,
starting to read for it.
I didn't know that. I heard about Midland City, Indianapolis, that immediately
Yeah.
jumped in my head.
And now it's opens in Atlanta October 12th. I fly out on Sunday.
Yeah.
Hotlanta, yeah, and it's at Synchronicity Theater, which is a great theater.
Awesome.
And then it will and the last part of the role, the specific NNPN theater role is in Nebraska in March at Angels Theater. But then a really cool theater, like I talked about in Oregon, hopped on board, which you can do within the role itself. So it speaks to the journey. It's just that it has to do with funding in a certain way. But they were so passionate about the play, they wanted to do it on their own. And it's Oregon Contemporary Theater. And so that will open mid-January there. So really
awesome.
it's really in 4 major cities across it's 3 more major cities across the country. And a lot of people are asking to read the play, which is great. And so there's a lot of talk about what's next, either in a part of the country we haven't reached yet, and New York. New York is always a conversation. It takes a little bit of time, and you want to take your time. But I think that's definitely going to happen at some point.
Love it. So exciting to hear about it. Going to jump around. There was about 123 discrete points you're making there in my head that I would like to talk about. Talking about Rockin', man. Looks like I'll be able to get to see it, hopefully, before too long.
Right.
That's awesome. All right, Crystal. We're talking Crystal Skillman. You're born... You an artist? Like, you little kid? You writing? Did you become an artist?
Yeah. Born 1974 in San Diego. So the first 6-7 years I'm out on the West Coast, and then we did a big cross country trip, which really influenced my life. And that is in Rain and Zoe. Towing my dad's race car. And we end up in upstate New York. And in upstate New York, that's where I start, being involved with community theater. And I was always really a visual artist, like photography in particular is where I kind of shone. But I was always doing theater, and I love theater. And so it's so funny that I was doing theater age 7, on, but I did not know until I was 23 and took a playwriting elective at the Hartford Art School in Connecticut before I went to Parsons by Edward Allen Baker.
You over there in Hartford? You over there in Hartford?
I'm in West Hartford. It's a great art school. Oh, he's so cool because you had all this land. So you had studio, dark room, you had your own dark room. It was pretty freaking cool. But but I didn't ever meet anyone who wrote theater. And a lot of the plays, I was pretty, when I was little, I liked being in Pete's Dragon. I was like, I like Pete's Dragon. I like those songs. It's fun. But I was always in the back without taps at 42nd Street. I had one line of Pete's Dragon. When I got sick one day, they're like, oh, we'll just give your line to another Towns member. I was like, you know what? This feels weird. I knew I wasn't an actor. But I liked this form. And, the plays sometimes are quite dated. I didn't really love this play called Boy's Life that at some point I had to be in. And, it was maybe I liked 10% of the plays that were being picked by people.
Come on, let's go. I want to drop into this thing.
Yeah, they weren't great. But I didn't even know that people wrote them because I never met the authors, right? Sure. I technically knew Stephen Sondheim was alive, but I didn't meet him at the time. So, my favorite thing that I ever was in was Anyone Could Whistle. That's a great play. And Arthur Cope is amazing. Cope is different. Arthur Lawrence, amazing writer. He also did the book for West Side Story and a lot of other things. But so So it wasn't until I took that class, I was like, oh my God, people write these things. And then I kind of realized, because at that point I was making kind of worlds, like with my photographs and my art.
Yeah.
There were scripts. Sometimes I was in it, and then and I was doing something downtown that I wrote called Carpe Diem is Not a Japanese Fish. And these like critics were there, and it was a critic of the New Yorker at the time. She's like, who are you? Like, these are plays. I was like, what's, oh, cool. Like, she's like, you're a playwright. I was like, what's a playwright? Like, I just didn't know, like, even though I'd been doing theater forever, like, it was so funny to me. And so, and my drama department was really amazing at my high school. So I started to, I think the first part of the story is that actually I went back to the dark room and I looked a little forlorn, and I don't know if I was literally crying. And somebody was like, what's wrong? Like, one of my photography buds was like, dude, what's wrong? Like, you're doing great, in this senior year, and you're gonna have your final crit and all this stuff. Or maybe it was like junior, I had 2 more years left. I was like, oh shit, I think I'm fucking a playwright. I'm like fucked. Like, I was like,
well, yeah.
Because at that point
I just got a diagnosis. It's
right.
terminal.
Yeah, it's terminal, because I'm at the Parsons School of Design. This changes everything. And I think the other thing that I usually don't tell in the story that I think was the final part of deciding, because to me it was like, is your work on the walls of a gallery that people can choose to walk through? You could dictate a bit, maybe do some certain times, but ultimately is going to have their own interaction. Maybe they read something, maybe they put on the headphones, maybe not, like maybe they can also just walk by it. But, or do I want their captured attention with the arc of a story for a certain amount of time? And I knew that was basically the decision. The second thing was that I assisted this really incredible photographer. I mean, doing 24 by 24 Polaroids and this really cool machine. It was about this whole series of people who had been tattooed. And she really liked me. And she was like, do you want to be my assistant? And I spent about 3 days with her. And I knew I could do it, but I also was terrified. I was terrified I would ruin her photograph. I was terrified that somehow I'd fuck up. And I just was like, I don't, and I was like, oh, this is quite unfortunate, because this is kind of like why my dad was a lone race car driver and then a trucker in a way. Like I was scared to work for, I was like, I don't know if I know eventually then I'd be a photographer of my own, but most of that work, especially for years, would be being an assistant. And I was like, I just don't know if that's going to happen. Like and I'm so responsible. Like I can't like entertain, oh, well, sometimes you make mistakes. I was like, but this is someone else's life, And so, so playwriting also put me in I was in control of what that was, or at least that's what I thought at the time. And so my bud in the darkroom was like, dude, why don't you're like at the new, you're at the new school, right? Like, I know you have all these art classes and, you're doing experimental, photography and painting and stuff like that. It's like, but like, literally, have you looked at the writing? Have you looked at the writing courses? Like, you could take any of these classes. And I was like, what? I was like, what? And I did. So I took live poetry, where we wrote poems in our heads. We never wrote them down. I took, they didn't have the greatest playwriting classes at the time, but I took some, and I took novel writing, and I did just as much writing classes. And then I started to intern at New York theaters. And that's when I got put into a group of playwrights called Young Blood. And those playwrights became kind of my best friends. And and playwrights are competitive, but playwrights are also really, really beautiful people, and I love them. So So then I was launched, and that was kind of the thing.
I love that. I've done the show for a while, and and there's over 300 episodes, and a lot of times, like, my learning can come through like the conversations, like listening to you in particular about like the play and the kind of feel of a playwright and their artistic aim, and so I really love to hear like how you bumped into and everything in like the journey of moving from piece to piece. Because I was reading about you, and it's like it's cool. I love reading about people. It's like there's a playwright and comic books. You're talking about the photography. You do a lot of podcasts. Like you just do a lot of things and see like what's the artistic thread that pulls you through. Um, about writing plays and the piece that I heard from you, it sounded like important for that, for you to be able to control that and for you able to see your vision that way. I personally get intimidated at times when we're talking about somebody's art and there's like all these other factors involved and the ensemble and things like that. For you as a creator, as a playwright, what's that process like as far as how it comes together like in these different places? Do you find yourself like attached to how you see it and like this is the way it's supposed to be, or do you like as a creator you're just like, wow, that's how they're gonna do that there, and I didn't see that in my own play, but
Ah,
go.
yes. Yes, I see too, with the different productions, like
Yeah.
yeah. Um, well, it's like you have to love what you do, and the truth of that I think comes with age and time is you have to love what the medium is meant to do. So if you want to write a film, but you're really more interested in language, you really don't care about the shots, and you don't want to describe them, you don't see it visually in your head, no one can make that film other than maybe you, if it's all in your head, like Amadeus, and you couldn't write it down, because then you could just maybe make it. But you're probably not going to tell that story as a screenplay, because that's what that medium's meant to do. The film is meant to tell that story through images, right?
Mhm.
Photography is so exciting because there are stories. Like I loved Allen Ginsberg's work where he would write a little bit with I love, and Barbara Kruger. I love the idea of text and image together, which is
Yeah.
stationary, but it can be a whole thing. And in fact, sometimes she takes over a whole room, and which is exciting and so
Oh,
cool. But that's like a mix. But again, you do have to accept that people may walk through it in a certain way or engage with it in a certain way. And
yeah.
then we've got comics, which is storytelling in increments of time, told visually. Language is important, but the visuals are ultimately more important, because you're not reading a panel full of balloons, right? Someone's
Yeah.
got to draw it, something's going to happen. But there's a controlled art to the graphic novel of like, when does a page flip come? When does the splash page come? When is it, like, what's
Yeah.
a unit? And so you get to create
Pace.
something visual that asks uh, brings in a reader in a different way in their relationship to it, as opposed to a novel, which is entirely descriptive. If you really want to get into people's heads, you probably want to write a novel, or you want to do audio drama, right? Which has a lot of similar things to novels. Like Night Vale has great dialogue, but like a lot of those pieces are almost like little novels being read, so so for theater, one of the things you have to come back to that, one of the things you have to accept is you are ultimately, which also I think is why people draw people to it, but then you're going to have to accept the yin and the yang of that, which is that you have created a blueprint, and you've created a blueprint that, so when you've written the graphic novel and then it is drawn and then edited and then published, or when you have made the screenplay and it is shot, or you have written the TV series and the TV series is made, or the audio drama thing has come out as a podcast, right? When you remake that, you're remaking what was made.
Yeah.
A play, because it is like just a text to be interpreted, is a blueprint to be interpreted over and over again by many people. That is the function of it. And so you have to love that aspect of it, or else
Yeah.
I would say don't do it, because
Yeah.
that's that. But it gives you a gift, because you yourself learn in so many ways, because I think two things: it allows you to create something where ultimately what you learn as a craftsperson and like honing your craft over years is how you can make that play through workshop and production so strong before you publish it and give it to others that you don't know, basically, that
Yep.
the architecture of it's so strong, it is so clear. And I learned this, I first learned this, I had this, was able to phrase it this way when I loved this play Pillow Man. Like I loved it. I just loved it so much. And it's so detailed and rich and seems easy, but it's not easy. And I was actually wanting to teach from it. So I was looking for a snippet from the Broadway production because sometimes you can find little scenes online. And Martin McDonough is the writer of that. And I couldn't find it, but I did find this like YouTube video of two guys who were not like they could not act. They could not act. Like they couldn't act. They clearly loved this scene.
Yeah.
They were dressed in suits, like that didn't really fit them. Like they just kind of they shot it in an actual office. So they gave themselves, and they had like some files as props, and because it basically deals with the bureaucracy of torture and storytelling and very, it goes to all sorts of places. And I was like, wow, even though these guys are not trained, they don't know where the beats are. They actually don't know how to act at all. I was riveted. I could follow the scene and I could follow the story. And I was like, that's because it's built that well. And so I started to go, well, what makes it built this well? And yet, and I'm always looking for the balance between the subconscious and the conscious. So I realized that, and then I also paired that with something I learned from Pam McKinnon, who I really respect and love. And we've talked about working together a few times. And she said to me, because I'm a little impatient. So I'm always trying to wrestle that with myself too. I'm impatient. I love a Polaroid, but I also want something to be last in the culture. Like, what is it? What is that? You know?
Yeah.
And she said, Crystal, you have to understand the American clock is slow. And when she said that, it just released something in me, because I think I'd been blaming myself for a long time with how long it is to have a career as an artist or build a career, and how long it is, especially in theater, because theater, for all of the beautiful things you can do, if you're not going to produce everything yourself, and you really shouldn't, because you need to see how other people do your, like, it's great to keep a DIY spirit, but you most likely don't want that to happen every time, because you want the experience of other people interpreting your work, including producers, and you want to work with other people that have different points of view from yourself. And so if you look at it, theaters only have 3 to 6 slots. That most of them had mostly 6 slots, but many of them had to go down 3. Many of them are producing in different ways because we're still coming off the theater crisis, the pandemic, and then also now we are rebels, right? So if you're choosing to do a piece in a certain way, you might get funding stripped from you. So like all sorts of things are going on. So you could write the greatest play of all fucking time, and nobody, first of all, visibility is challenging already, but like, how do you even get it to someone who is at the head of owning this space and time that each year only does maybe at tops 12, probably more like 6. And they have formed, in most cases, a hierarchy of gatekeepers because they don't have time to read. So like, how does that work?
Yeah.
like how does that work? And there is very little, if we all love to talk about the American theater, because we're like, I can fix it, or I know what I can do. And I've talked to many organizations that like, someone's like, Crystal, well, what are you going to, if you don't like the way this works, then what are you doing? Are you going to make another organization that's like us, that's but your own thing? And I was like, okay, well, I understand. Everyone likes to talk about the problems and offer solutions. And then when you try to get in there, it's really tough. It's an expensive medium. You're giving your time to it. It's live. People have to perform it live. They have to agree for this salary and or beautiful story that they're not going to see put their children to bed at night because they've got to do a night show, right? Like it requires a amount of almost like a vocation, right? It requires so much. And for the artistic director, why can't they read everything all the time? Because they have so many, they have to raise money. They have to do so many things. There's just so many wheels and so many things that people have to do and to create this beautiful, almost like, because what we're saying is like, we're building little doll houses where you're invited in and you could come inside our dollhouse, right? Like, I mean, it's just a lot. And so, what I do wish that I felt like there was a little bit more of when I was a baby playwright is I wish that there was more effort to create direct communication with younger writers. What happens is we have a lot of young writer groups, but those are also kind of like created to be like the best will rise to the top, or like this, the one who talks the most will get the most
Yeah.
attention, or the one that is deemed the great, so like, and look, we can't, that's America, like you can't get away from that. This is like built into everything. But I wish that artistic directors would say, hey, I don't have the time, I get it, i'm I'm at least going to make sure my literary department, that I have a literary department, number one, which a lot of it's gone away, number two, that their folk is not just to email people, but to have coffee with them. And it's not everybody, but like we really do need to, and something else that could be done that does feel like it's not as heavy a lift as it should be. You don't have to do it tomorrow. Make a list of the plays you wish you could have done, you can't do. And at some point during the year, get on the phone and call somebody who you think will do it, because you have information. Now, that does
Mhm.
happen. That does happen, Ken. It does, but it should happen a lot more. And I know we're tired. And like, again, if we can't do it, like, is it someone who's learning, who's going to do that kind of thing?
Yeah.
And then there's the flip side of that too, which is like people understand that if you promise something and you don't deliver, you've disappointed them and you've ruined a relationship. So artists often don't think like this, or especially if you're a baby playwright, but they actually, it's not that they don't like you or want to do you or even help you, but they want to offer specific help. And if they don't, you might resent them. And they don't want that either, because they want a good relationship with you. So there's a lot of
Sure.
factors to this. I just think that like, could we talk so much about getting enough money to do the productions, and I think we need more money to facilitate these kinds of conversations, to get to know what different people are doing. And a lot of people are even questioning how plays work and what can be a play. And that's what should happen, because
Yeah.
every generation should be um exploding and exploring, rather than asking what's the next Hamilton. Why don't you ask, like, who's the next person who's really using this form in a way to tell stories that excite me today. And it's not just one person, right? So like, why don't you make a goal to like talk to 20 of those people that you don't know in 1 year?
Yeah.
What if you made that, just made that commitment? Maybe 10, just do 10.
I was listening to the podcast Freakonomics. They did an extended, I was like 3 or 4 episodes in a row. It was dropping down heavy into the questions you're talking about. The role of theater and plays, and the super idiosyncratic piece of like live performance over time, what it asks of the audience, what it asks of performers, like in this day and age, labor intensive, expensive, people going to be on
Hmm.
time. But it was ultimately fascinating because it seemed to like vacillate around the fundamental questions that you were bringing up about, like, what is its purpose, what is a play, and then be an experimental play where you're plopped out somewhere. This particular thing had just kind of messing. I like the areas in art where you're being messed with, like in boundaries. Are you a participant, not participant? Being forced to move into areas is like the performers over there. How close am I supposed? Like all these things that kind of bring in the fundamental like questions of what we're up to. Somehow that was a lead into the big question that I had to ask you is, what is art? What is art?
Art provokes change. A change does not need to be, just like drama isn't huge all the time. Change can be a discovery, a question, a new question, uh, something that sticks with you, that makes you um, think twice before you do something, or realize perhaps it can be done a different way. or inspire you to tell your own story in a certain way, to have a conversation, to reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in a long time. It can foster understanding. It allows you to step into someone else's shoes and have empathy in a way, without thinking about it, without being afraid. You are in the pool and having all the experiences of swimming without having to get in the pool, because you just showed up. You just showed up and you're in the pool. You don't have to be like, oh, is it cold? Is it hot? Do I stick my toe in? Do I do
Yeah.
this? And we take care of all of that for you. And you could leave that experience and say, I didn't like that pool. I don't want to go back to that pool again. And that's great. But you were in the pool and it did something. And even if then it's a contrary reaction that you have to it, that's exciting, because in most, I've been disturbed about this at every age of my life. And it might just be because I was an only child and I just had to really I was my best friend and I had to talk to myself. I don't know what it was, why I have such an intense reflection of things. But I would say for the moment I was very young, like even 6 years old, I really understood people. I am often surrounded by people who do not think that anything can change, that do not think that change is possible, that think that the status quo is the way it is. And that's where we get the phrase, of course, that's the way it is. Don't ruffle feather. It is what, and then I realized I want to be in the rooms where nothing's impossible, because nothing really is.
That
It
makes a
just
lot
can't
of
happen
sense.
necessarily tomorrow,
No.
And so it's about time and perseverance and craft and growth, and humility, and all those things that are really, really, really challenging to do. But that's why I think I'm in the middle of Slaughterhouse-Five, and I'm like, and so it goes, right? And so it goes. And so it goes. So I think it's like, so I think that the more that we can expose children, to these, because once you see it, once you know something's possible, you
Yeah.
don't forget it. And I think that's what theater does. It allows you to see, and it could be as simple as, I'm talking about some heady stuff a bit, but it could be as simple as, seeing Mary Poppins and you saw somebody fly. That's awesome. It makes your brain do things, makes your heart do things,
I think it was like it's about the possible. There's something really, really vibe you with, and it was about like this, the way things have already been. And I was realizing when you're talking about it, it's like the most psychologically exhausting for me to be around, because it's not just hope, it's being like something about as mundane as this principle. If you look around, or I look around 2025, I'm walking around Oregon. If you think this shit show and this level of human behavior, of human to human through whatever thing, is somehow like where we can get to, and the thought doesn't even have legs in my head. It's so for me, I find that my reactive energy against that, it's not all these things are possible tomorrow or anything. Like, it's a fundamental belief that things are improper, not well situated, getting worse, moving more towards crisis, that lead me to be like something different. Let's go. Let's look
something
at
different.
something different, because this is a death march. The inertia of this being fine for me is not my path. So
No.
I,
And to seek oppression of others, and of women, and of rights, and minorities, and it, it everything that's going on in this country right now, with power and these dynamics, and the class wars and all of this, it really, the ego, it comes back to the same reason that it's hard to write sometimes, which is that, what I tell my students is that I just say, hey, do you ever have this voice that tells you you're no good or this is going to suck? Or they're all like, yeah. So I'm like, that's not you, and it's your ego. And the reason why it's happening is your ego wants you to stay where you are. The ego is not a terrible thing. It actually is a survival kind of thing. It's
A buffer.
it's a buffer, and it goes overboard. And what it wants, it says, I don't want you to fail, because failure is bad and you're going to feel bad and it's not going to work and you get depressed. You're going to lose your job. You're going to do this. And then you're going to be in the street and they're going to be so it says, just stay the same, just be quiet, stay the same, do the same thing. Don't do something different. Because if you do something different, because it's true. So one of the things that is challenging for people that are scared is that, of the something different and the new is that they think, they don't understand that does invite other conversation, and not everyone's going to like it, and that it's going to be a thing. But that is the point of life, because that's the point of life, because life has always evolved, and it's going on, so I think that is something innate in human nature of these people that are kind of want to live like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, of the Twilight Zone. In fact, Twilight Zone, I keep thinking Twilight Zone, because this is what Rod Serling was attempting to do in television for the first time, is talk about these social justice issues through these parables. But now we're starting to see people react like Monsters of Maple Street. We're starting to see these images look the same as like the Twilight Zone. And that was a crafted show, right? And again, they were inspired by it. So I think that, but they're not able to see it. I ask this consistently, like, how are they able to watch Star Wars and be like, I'm the good guy, so, storytelling can't always do it, in a sense, because they like Wolf of Wall Street. Who loves Wolf of Wall Street? Wall Street people. They love it. They think they're the hero. That's not the point of the film.
Pornography. Self-reflective pornography.
Yes. So I think that so there's these aspects of human nature. I think what you and I don't have are grappling with it. I feel like you've seen a lot. I've seen certain things, but I feel the level of darkness with it, the level of what they, because now we're getting to the point of like, well, I know someone else will suffer. Like, I know, like, it's not a question anymore. It's not like, oh, the newspaper didn't report it. And, I don't have social media. It's not the 50s where you could kind of be like, oh, well, I only know what my husband tells me when he comes home from work. And, so like we're talking about, and that's what I think the Rocket Men really is. When I come back to the one word, right, that the Rocket Men is about, it's about indifference. And so, how we're seeing a level of quantification of living with indifference that I just think I haven't seen that to this extent, or encountered it to this extent. And I think this is a whole other podcast, but there's a reason why some people feel really happy and excited about AI. Again, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? Maybe it's easier. Maybe it's just easier, right? Like I guess the thing is, like, whatever your belief is, and if it is God, he also made the decision to, or you believe in the Greeks and fate, right? You got a thread, you got a life, you don't know when it's going to end. Maybe you go somewhere else, maybe you don't. That depends on what you believe. But why are you here? Why are you living life? I don't think God was like, it's so you can like make a certain amount of money a year and pump out 7 kids and, oppress other people. Like, I don't, it just isn't something that jives with anything. Doesn't make any sense.
No, I appreciate that. I can really feel that. And of course, I think with politics it's moving every day. And I think humans notice where folks are placed within it. But I have the big question I have to ask you. I mean, you wrapped it back around to the Rocket Man, but the name of the title of the show is Something Rather Nothing. Why? Why is there something rather than nothing? Like, why?
The title is so provocative because you get excited about this thrilling moment in history you think you're showing up to see. It gives you that thrill, but then it also shows you why you have that thrill and why you had the thrill from the story being told that way. And it happens immediately from the women's bodies on stage. Your mind literally does like a brain flip. To come back to how startling that is. And again, this is new. This is only a month old. I wasn't quite expecting it, in the development of the play. And again, it's different because it was developed. Yeah. In Alabama it was developed a bit, and in some readings in New York and stuff. But New York is like a whole other ball game, so we just did a reading. So full cast, about to go up at Phoenix Theater in Indianapolis. Which is a very cool town, by the way.
I'm fascinated.
It's interesting. And Bloomington is a big college town, and they have a great theater called Constellations, and it's a really cool place. And so we did a special reading with that cast, but with no costumes and no set, just a reading. But they were pretty much performing it, right? Because they know it. They're going to go up like in a week. The donors and a lot of people there were invited, and they love theater. Like these are people, they did tend to be of the older generation in that particular crowd. They were mostly white in that moment, not all, but before we read, a woman stood up and she said, oh no, before that, even a man in front of me said, why are they women? And then before I could talk and say, you're going to see the play, which is pretty much what I was going to say, he just said, DEI, DEI. He just kept saying DEI, as if I had done this to get a grant or something, or if I had done this in a certain,
stomach's feeling pukey.
Yeah. And so I'm just listening, but he's not, but number one, he's there. He comes back after intermission. So there's been a public conversation around gender and equality and and diversity that I do not believe people are prepared for, and it has been twisted and turned. I think it's confusion, right?
Yeah.
So, and then across the aisle, a woman stood up and she said, "Why are they women?" she just like the act of these 6 women on stage called, and I love Constance Macy is a good friend. She was the lead in that show. She's the AD of Phoenix, and she just stood up. She's playing Von Braun. She stood up and she just said, "All will be revealed." And it was so dynamic, and it was like vibrant. And then by the end, people were crying, and people were like, they have to be women. Now I understand. But and in theater making, we discussed this, like Mac Wellman, one of my favorite playwrights of all time, and a really, really amazing teacher, and he taught at Brooklyn College for a long time. He said there are two theaters and 2 groups of audiences. The theater of the audience that wants the theater of the known, and the theater of the known would have been they are men. In fact, you wouldn't even have the idea that they're women. Theater of the known would be like, this story's fascinating. We are going to get George Clooney in here, and we're going to do the show, right? So that's the theater of the known. The theater of the unknown is that you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know what choices the characters are going to make next. Even if you read a review or something was spoiled, it's happening in such a startling way you didn't expect that your mind is doing like flips, and your body is having reactions to it. The theater of the unknown, you leave with questions, and recommend you leave with questions. In the theater of the known, you leave and you turn to your audience member. You say, well, that was great. George Clooney can play a really good Nazi. Like, do you know what I mean? You put it on your coat and you say, hey, that's what I saw. It confirmed what I thought. It confirmed my $225. Which is really what they're saying, actually, in the exchange at some point when we get into Broadway and things like that. So I have always written plays that have present you think it's about one thing, and then you're in it and it's about another. Now it prepares you for that, but ultimately to make that experience work, you're not going to know everything before. This is why people love doing posters for my work as well. It's very challenging because you want it to be clear, but also evocative. And so I think that I didn't realize in my little liberal, maybe New York bubble, I didn't realize how challenging I know rights. I'm scared as a woman in the sense that our with our rights, and we're going to this Handmaid's Tale world and all these, of course, I have all these things in mind. That's why I'm telling the story of these women in many ways, but
Mhm.
I wasn't prepared for the level of fear about body switching or gender transforming
Yeah.
in in um, in storytelling or life or the culture. And I just did a play about the love of two women in New York called Open. So I, it really struck me that, and I think what also struck me was it wasn't antagonistical in a cruel way. It was a genuine confusion and questioning, and it was
Yeah.
coming mostly from maybe mid 60s and up. And yeah, and I'm not sure because those aren't the people. They're in a theater, right? They're spending their time. These aren't the people that are saying, "Hey, we only want to fold laundry and do that." Like, it's not that group.
Yeah, like
So it just made me
theater
wonder,
does
what does
hold,
it mean? Yeah.
theater does hold a lot. I mean, outside, yeah, I want to see more ritualistically, men are men, women are, that type of thing. But also, my gosh, it's the theater as well. Like, you don't, you don't know. I mean, unless you're dealing with the absolute known, like you said, like this is what this is here. I know there'll be variances or whatever, but decent amount of time when you're just thinking about it live is unknown because it's going to be unique. Each one's
And
going to be unique. It can't be the
well,
same.
unique, and also like because the play is not a biopic.
Yeah,
Um, I thought a lot about this because I love King Kirby, and I love that it's about the life of Jack Kirby, and it's written like a comic book, and it's really beautiful. It sometimes bugs me when people talk about it like a biopic because I'm like, to me, a biopic is about, well, we just have to tell, like, Oppenheimer to me is not a biopic. Oppenheimer
I'd
has
agree.
very serious question. Copenhagen is not a biopic of Heisenberg and Bohr. So when there's enough of a provocative question of why, not just why these things happen, but why this individual made these choices and the impact and the larger impact on American culture. I just don't consider it a biopic. So I really thought a lot of like, I want to get out of that. Some people will do that. They're going to say that about the show, but how is it not a documentary? How is it not these other things? Like, how do I really on
Yeah,
stage own that from the very beginning? So when we have the women playing the men, the other thing that I acknowledge is that the headshots of the men they are playing are projected behind them when they first step into the men,
yeah,
because I want you to understand that is the way the men looked, and I want you to see how they look, and I wanted to just nail it and address it on the head
yeah. And the
because
visual stands for itself too. Whatever happens to somebody, the visual stands for
and if
themselves as
they
well.
were cast as men, right, then what happens is we get into a dangerous territory without that stepping in of, oh, I gotta play it just like this guy, right? And I
Yeah,
didn't want that, and I didn't want people to come and expect that. And I've been in audiences before. So it's interesting. It's kind of like doing where Hamilton is cast that way because it is the story of immigrants told by Lin Manuel, having that particular viewpoint on that story, and that's
yeah,
why these bodies are on stage because they weren't a part of the actual history. And it's not unsimilar with why these women bodies are on stage, but in particular, it's revealing the fact of all these names and all these people that perished in this place that you never knew, including these women. Um, yeah.
wow.
Making rockets. But it's
Rocket. I
important,
love rocket.
and it ends with
There,
hope, and it ends with the fact that they wanted the future just as much
I
as
love
Von Braun, so
I love rockets. The time. There's one other point, like in talking about history and time. I've written some stuff, and there's pieces. I think when I grew up, teens in the mid '80s and stuff like that, the impending like nuclear war, that shit really fucked with my head. But like, I laugh about it and smile because it's like it kind of suited me, like. nuclear war and rockets, and as you're growing up and it's the air that you breathe, I didn't know anything
Mm.
else, and it's comic books and it's big cosmic battles and it's right versus wrong and it's like nuclear clouds and it's going to Mars. It's like all that was just like all out there. Everything seemed cataclysmic as a kid, and I reflected on it. I just never realized it at the time. Um, uh, Thank you for. I love talking about plays, and again, I felt I might have alluded to this a little bit uh, outside. I go love to see plays, but I do get to talk to folks from New York and some off Broadway, and hearing about these plays and productions all around the country. There's a fervency and like a vibrant energy feel. I love talking to you about it and being able to see this. Um, Asking all those massive questions too, and seeing all those comic books around you, and knowing that you've dropped into the comic universe and done those things, like who your couple, whether it's graphic novel characters, superheroes, who your go-to characters in
Oh,
that
yeah.
world. Like,
Um,
just you need that.
yeah, I have recently, I'm a little filled with some of the treatment of them with TV shows and stuff. Like the James Gunn stuff, I just think is so amazing and
Yeah,
perspectives. And so Peacemaker took a bit to get there in season two, but I really like where it's going. So I'm thinking a lot about Peacemaker right now, just because of that. But I would say that like Frank Miller's, Batman.
yeah,
Um, and those like questions of crime and righteousness, but like what the choices, what you're doing, that Watchmen, obviously, Mouse, I think anytime like serious, questions have come up with these beautiful stories. So I think it's more the stories that they get into than necessarily the superheroes. But I would
yeah.
say that the X-Men as a group, I feel like I get such pleasure, and knowing, Jack's involvement with that, I get such pleasure with how many teens and throughout history and generations are really drawn to that team, and those characters.
Yeah.
Um, and I've always particularly loved, but I think it's more the design probably from the original. It never really translated great to the comics, but sorry, TV. But I love the Wasp. Like I
Oh
love
yeah.
her look. I love her, and yeah, and I also I thought WandaVision was probably one of the best,
Oh
most
my god.
interesting, and I think she's such a great character, and,
Oh,
yeah.
I
So I think
love
of
that.
those things, and I think of, like, what the stories are doing, and those and who we love. I also love the iconicness of Superman. Like, I love that he represents, um, something so ideal, and I love it that he always annoys all the other characters because he's so kind of above it. I also really love, and I also look goofy, but my husband loves them too. I love those like old. I got really into because sometimes we watch them. The like old, super villain group and the superhero friends and just that
Yeah,
70s animation. Like I
yeah.
don't know, like it just kind of.
It's comforting.
It is comforting.
It is.
So we've been doing some of that. I'm trying to think. I know I'm reading new stuff, and I feel terrible that uh, I'm I'm not, remembering, like, because it's been a hot second. There was this one with this unicorn. I'll send you a little list of, the graphic novels that I've been
I
thinking
have
about getting
to.
into.
Dropping into the comics world on the show. I think the longest episode I've done is the What If episode,
Oh,
which is an
that's fun.
absolute absurdity. I think you've done an issue of What If, haven't you? Written?
Yes. Yes, I did. So my thing with Marvel, my Marvel credits
Fantastic Four.
are I anytime, because I worked in musical theater, so anytime Fred was writing something and they wanted an evil villain number and song, which happens more often than you think, I wrote the lyrics. So I wrote in a What If episode that was a musical universe that the Fantastic Four get trapped in. I wrote the evil song that Doctor Doom sings, and
Oh
that
gosh.
I know, it's like, I love it that villains and song, like that's comics, and I also just, it's a super geek thing, but I really love the connection between comics and musical theater. It's just like my favorite thing like ever. And I
Wow,
would say that the
that's a nice
culmination
thread.
of that artistically is Fun Home.
Oh gosh,
It's so
yeah.
good.
Alison
And
Bechdel.
but we just saw Cavalier and Clay. I made us go. I'm
I
not an opera
saw an
person.
ad for that. How was
I
that?
went.
Yeah.
It was a little first of all, go, because some of the
Yeah.
visual
Michael Chabon.
Shimon, yeah.
Chabon.
It I loved sitting at, like, I had a lot of great thoughts and feelings. There were certain moments. It just so it was I can't say whether it was great or not, because in the sense that, like, I don't see opera all the time, and so, like, this form to me is different. But I was really moved by many of the scenes, and some of the visuals, particularly the ending of Act One, really knocked my socks off. I think really getting to the relationship of these two guys got a little lost in this treatment, although I think they had to streamline a lot from the book itself, and I think it's
Yeah.
really challenging. So I would absolutely recommend going, because I don't think you're going to see, like, it's so unique. And I think that it's and I would also say, particularly in Act One and Act Two, it got a little I just like the visuals of Act One better. The Act One with the escapist and the visuals of that, between the animation drawn on stage
Mhm.
to the costumes, really blew my mind. I really there's just so much design wise, and the sound is really interesting, because the sound sounded almost more like soundtracks. So, like, if
Oh,
you
wow.
like, yeah, it has a thriller aspect to it. So, yeah, I definitely would highly recommend. I don't think you're going to see anything else like it. So, go. And here,
Wow.
it's a comic books, right? And here we've got the fancy chandeliers, and it's so fancy, and you can read the little libretto, and you're with the fancy people with the fancy opera. I mean, I love it when comics get the highbrow treatment, because it's so cool. Like, I love,
Yeah. I
I've
dig
wanted,
that.
we've all wanted a comic book museum for a long time, like a real one, like the MoMA, like, but with only comic books,
Yeah.
because we believe it deserves that kind of elevation. So, so it's cool to see that, and a lot of Cavalier and Clay, with the storytelling of the artist, is based on Jack Kirby. So for us, we were getting thought it was
Oh,
interesting.
King Jack Kirby. We
Mhm.
can I'll have to have you on again to talk Jack Kirby for a while. I I really appreciate you taking time, Crystal, everybody, Crystal Skillman, the making art, hearing the stories back behind it, live theater. Thanks for all the things you create. And just so, like for the audience here, like, get a lot of different things. She talked about the play, where it will be, but like any places for people to go, like get your art, find out more about you.
Yeah. Most of my work is published, which is I'm pretty grateful for. So Open is published by DPS, which is now Concord, and Concord is actually where most of my work is, and there probably will be a new publication of it coming out soon. But if you read about it had a beautiful um, critically acclaimed run off Broadway. That was my first off Broadway credit this August at WP Theater. So if you're interested in reading Open, there's a great publication of it. You can definitely get your hands on that, which is great. You just order it anywhere you buy stuff, like Amazon or whatever, or you can go to your if you're in New York, you could go to the drama bookshop and you can get a signed copy. Cut and Geek are published there too. You can visit my website for all that stuff. And I'm just Crystal Skillman .com. And as well, I am on most medias. I'm often on the gram at Crystal Skillman. I'm not shy. I don't have like a fake name. And say hi, and I would say that we've got those going around the city. There's something else happening in Oregon. There's a student production of kind of like workshop production directed by a great director, Tracy Francis. In Portland, kicking off Halloween weekend and the weekend after. It's Rain and Zoe Save the World, which is my cross-country adventure about two teenagers who are going cross-country to shut down a pipeline. And it's told in a very comic book kind of style. And so that's happening then too. That's it. That's about, I guess, 6 productions that you could possibly get or see. But I would also say that King Kirby is often produced. We just had a production in Texas. I think there's another upcoming production. So if you follow me on Instagram, I definitely have links in my bio to all those things, so you can keep up to date on those things. You can also follow the shows themselves. King Kirby does have a Instagram. I do need to put some of this stuff on there, but the Rocketman is pretty active as well. The Rocketman play is that, and Open also has their own Instagram. So
I was poking around that. Great, thanks for laying that out there. Really a great pleasure to chat with you, and creative space and thinking about all these things. I look forward to seeing some works out here. The East Coast stars call it Oregon, or how did they say it? Oregon. And if there's something that I love, sorry, Oregonians, is the cringe phase when my brethren or comes out here and mispronounces. The East Coast is convinced that it is Oregon. They're just convinced. There's nothing you can do. So I love it though. There's this face on folks here where it's like, ugh, gosh. Looking forward to seeing your work in Oregon. Thanks again for popping on the show, Crystal Skillman. Keep writing, keep creating, because I want to keep reading and listening and watching.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Crystal.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.